So I am extremely grateful to a very large number of honourable members who have spoken and who have by and large supported the legislation. Some very valuable suggestions have also been made and some questions have also been raised. One of the questions which has been raised by some members is wondering if there has been a delay in bringing of this legislation. So if we see the provisions of Article 82 of the Constitution, as it was amended by the 42nd Amendment itself, the third proviso mentioned, and I am reading the third proviso, provided also that until the relevant figures for the first census taken after the year 2000 have been published, it shall not be necessary to readjust the allocation of seats. So by virtue of the 42nd Amendment, the delimitation which was done in the year 1972, which was published in 1976, had to continue till such time, till the year 2000, and it is only upon the turn of the century that an occasion to have a fresh delimitation really would have arisen. The second issue which has been raised is that already we have the 2001 census which has been conducted, but the language of Article 82 itself makes it clear that it is the published figures of the census which are relevant, and the last available published figures of the census itself are those of 1991. The figures of 2001 census will be published not before 2004, and in case we are to await for those figures, at least if the next election is held as per schedule, we will have to await the fresh delimitation. Therefore, when the 84th Amendment was approved by this Honourable House, it was considered desirable and it was discussed at length at that stage that the fresh delimitation would be on basis of the last available published figure, which is 1991 in the present case. Sir, a very important question has been raised by several members. Shri Gawai raised it, Shri Gautam raised it, with regard to the position of increase of number of SC constituencies in certain parts of the country. Sir, it is true that in 1957, after the conversion had taken place, particularly with its impact in Maharashtra, the benefit of reservation was not given to those who had converted. It is also true that in the year 1990, the Constitution Schedule Caste Order of 1950 was amended. The 1950 order originally mentioned in Para 3 that notwithstanding anything contained in Para 2, which published a list of all the scheduled caste castes, no person who professes a religion different from a Hindu religion shall be deemed to be a member of the scheduled caste. So a scheduled caste by its very concept could only fit into the Hindu religion and not into any other religion. Subsequently, the word the Sikh was also added to the Hindu, and by virtue of the 1990 amendment to the scheduled caste order, by virtue of the Constitution Scheduled Caste Order Amendment Act 1990, the word Buddhist was also added to this exception. Therefore, currently, the exception today reads that you can be a scheduled caste if you are within the parameters of a Hindu, Sikh or a Buddhist religion. The implication of this is very clear, that since this came in the year 1990, and this would be the first delimitation which takes place after 1990, all the neo-Buddhists would ipso facto get included in the list of scheduled castes, and when on basis of the 1991 census a delimitation is made, the number of constituencies perhaps in those states would increase. I was trying to collect the figures of the increase or decrease of the scheduled caste electorate. I don't have the figures in comparison to 1971, but even between 1981 and 1991, because this fact took place, in Maharashtra itself, the increase is a little over 4%, which implies that the number of constituencies would increase. There are some states where it has decreased also, though very marginally decreased. For instance, in Uttar Pradesh, the decrease during this 10-year period was 0.12. In Bihar, it was 0.6. But Maharashtra is predominantly the state where the increase and the impact of this increase would itself be felt. So several honourable members had raised some valid suggestions. Now, one of the suggestions which Justice Ranganath Mishra had made was that in Section 5, we should be careful in making sure that when the speakers of the legislative assemblies or of the Lok Sabha nominate the associate members, these associate members should be so nominated that they don't entirely belong to one party and there is a cross-section of representation of parties which is made available. So this language is actually a reproduction of the 1952 legislation, the subsequent 1962 legislation and the 1972 legislation. Clause 5, subclause 2 itself very clearly says that the persons to be so associated from each state shall be nominated in the case of members of the House of People by the Speaker of that House, and in the case of members of the Legislative Assembly by the Speaker of that Assembly, having due regard to the composition of the House, or as the case may be, the Assembly. So when the presiding officer of the Assembly or the Parliament has a due regard to the composition, the due regard would obviously take into consideration the cross-section of representation of that House, and there would be a pro rata representation made in accordance with this bill. This was the past practice and there is no reason why this would change. Some members have strongly pleaded that the associate members should also be given a voting right. In fact, Professor Yadav strongly opposed this suggestion, that they should not be given a voting right. In none of the previous three legislations, they have been given a voting right. And my strong plea to this House would be against grant of the voting right to the associate members for the reason, I recollect, sir, when Justice Ranganath Mishra was speaking, and Professor Yadav also, they mentioned that in the United States, tailor-making of your own constituency by a process of gerrymandering is something which is known. Now, in case associate members are given voting rights, and you have a 3-member commission and 10 associate members, you may actually have a situation where in some states where delimitation is being made, out of these 13, the majority of 7 may belong to representatives of a particular political party. For example, take the case today if in Punjab, when this group meets in the context of Punjab, the Congress may have more than 7. In the context of Gujarat, the BJP may have more than 7. In West Bengal, the left front may have more than 7. And therefore, you will actually have a situation where members of a political party may actually be able to influence the delimitation in that particular state. And perhaps the danger of gerrymandering which you mentioned would be a lot more if we just mindlessly said that we should give them a voting right without realizing what the consequence of giving a voting right to the associate members has been. It's been a well-settled practice that we have never granted them a voting right by virtue of this legislation, and I see no reason why we must really deviate from that particular practice. Sir, a lot of members expressed the view with regard to the freezing of the number of seats. Well, this was done by virtue of the 84th Amendment itself, and the reason why the 84th Amendment froze the seats was the reason which the members themselves indicated. Because in case we allowed this to go on in proportion to the increase of population, then those states which have successfully implemented the family planning programs, their representations would go down, and those states which have failed to implement, that is the defaulting state, their representation would go up. It was for this reason that it was specifically discussed in this House, and the Standing Committee had recommended, this House has also accepted, that the freeze should continue for the year till the year 2026. And 2026 was chosen as a cut-off date, not by picking that year out of the hat because of under the national population policy, that's anticipated to be the year where the population is expected to really stabilize. Sir, a suggestion has been made that in the earlier bills, we had 2 judges and 1 member from the Election Commission. Why are we now having only 1 judge? The reason why we considered changing this composition was that a very large part of this exercise is an administrative exercise. And when we conduct this administrative exercise, to have an impartial judge as the presiding officer or the head, and having the 2 members from the National Election Commission and the State Election Commission authorities as members was considered to be a more balanced composition than having an over-representation of judges, because the issue here is you need a fair application of mind, but many administrative considerations have to also go into a process of delimitation of constituencies. The issues are not such where there are judicially measurable standards which the judges have to apply some law and do it. A large part of the exercise is administrative, and therefore we kept a representative from the National Election Commission and the State Election Commission who perhaps may be able to make a much larger contribution while retaining a judge as the chairman, so that there is some element of fairness in this whole process itself. So there has been a considerable debate on this question of rotation of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe seats. This bill does not provide for it. And the reason it does not provide for it was some reasons were given by the members. But if I may honestly submit to a reason that there has been no political consensus on the question of rotation itself. And therefore, since this is an important piece of legislation, unless we have a larger consensus, to implement it or to even legislate in regard to it may be a little difficult. There are some dangers in the rotational principle also. Some were pointed out, but let me give a practical example. Scheduled tribe seats are reserved where the scheduled tribe population is the largest. It is quite natural and obvious that the scheduled tribe constituencies are represented by a scheduled tribe candidate. On a rotation principle, you may have in the first instance a tribal area represented by a tribal candidates only. When you rotate it next time, you may actually find a situation where Mumbai city may become a tribal constituency and the tribal constituency itself may be a general constituency. And therefore, for a general candidate to represent those areas on the principle of rotation itself may look a little odd, and for the tribal candidates to represent the Mumbai constituency may look a little odd. These are some aberrations which may also come by virtue of the rotation principle if the rotation principle were to apply in each and every situation. Therefore, we've considered avoiding the rotation for this particular occasion. Sir, Saralaji made a very impressive speech. I'm not referring to several other aspects which Shri Pranab Mukherjee and Mr. Gautam have referred to, but one issue which she raised, which does not arise under this bill, but it certainly does arise in relation to another legislation which we have introduced and which we are considering. She mentioned that we are now trying to find to the problem of corrupt practices in elections, use of money power in Rajya Sabha elections by abandoning the principle of secrecy of voting itself. Sir, let me say this, that we've always preferred the secret method of voting. In a parliamentary or a legislative election, you always have a secret method of voting. But let me remove this misconception. There is no such concept that secrecy of a ballot under all circumstances is some part of the basic features of an electoral process. Voting in this house takes place by a